Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It is September 30th, 2016. It's the end of the third quarter. Tomorrow is October 1st. Where is that guy who was predicting the end of the world for tonight? I wonder if he is still preaching that same message, right? So that will be interesting. And we are fortunate up to a certain point that it looks like the government shutdown has been averted. The government shutdown averted by a 7-week compromise, I believe, something that will get the U.S. federal government paid for into about the middle of December, at which time all of these issues will then be on the agenda once again. Now, we are 39 days from the U.S. general election, the presidential election, with all the Senate seats up and all the House seats up, a certain number of governorships and some state legislatures too, maybe not quite as many. But this is now the general election, and voting is going on in many, many states. I'm not going to try to keep up with the list of states. So remember, the point of intellectual activity, the purpose of theory is practice, right? Praxis. Theory has to turn into praxis. And what will it profit you if you know all the words in all the books, if you don't know what to do in terms of morality, in terms of moral action in the real world? So our theme today, in particular for U.S. Domestic purposes, and that is a significant chunk of the world right now because of the presidential election, we want to talk to you about the necessity for mass traction economic demands. Mass traction economics. Not process reforms, but actual mass traction economics, the kinds of things that have gone under the heading of eudaimonic legitimation. Eudaimonic legitimation means government becomes morally justified and legitimated by delivering the goods, by providing concrete economic, material, and cultural benefits for the citizenry, for the people, right? Citizens and others, for everybody in the jurisdiction, let us say. And that is the purpose of good government. And that is the basis of government stability. If you have mass traction economic demands that are being fulfilled, this is the way, and sometimes the only way, to sweep aside the rising tide of irrationalism and issues that go with that. And I want to reassert that despite the tempests of the recent weeks and months, we are still looking for a party realignment, at least for significant progress towards the party realignment, blocking the Republican plan for a permanent austerity dictatorship. And we go back to this issue that if the Republican Party were to assume control of the presidency, along with the Senate and along with the House, they would quickly be able to pack the Supreme Court, at least within a couple of years, and they would then be able to start doing things like outlawing trade unions. The Republican candidate has now come out for making every state a right-to-work state. So the union-busting thrust of the Republican ticket is out there for everybody to see. And I appeal to those blue-collar workers, right? You did not get the 40-hour week or Wages and Hours Act or the end of child labor or any kind of social advantages, conquests that you've been able to assume. You didn't get that through a free market. You got that through labor struggles, and at the center of those labor struggles were trade unions. So be aware of that. Don't forget it. Don't throw all that away. And the other side, of course, of the permanent austerity dictatorship is this issue of, can you vote? And we've seen that the desire to take away your vote is alive and well. And all that blathering we've heard about voter fraud, when there is no voter fraud done by little people, going from one county to another to try to make $100 on election day. This is ridiculous. This goes out with, remember old George Washington Plunkett, right? The guy from Tammany Hall who would, write a memoir, a little description of Tammany Hall from the inside, which is used still today in various politics and sociology courses. George Washington Plunkett, that's the era when, you could pay people to vote a couple of times. This just doesn't happen. Right now we have computers, right? We have things like the Republican computers of 2012 that were supposed to deliver God knows what, but didn't. So that's the kind of fraud we have. Not voter fraud, but top-down, cybernetic-assisted vote fraud. And we know that there's an attempt to try to spread this report that Russia is gunning for the U.S. election computers. Again, I remain somewhat skeptical about this, even though I deplore the appearance given by many Russian media that they're actively taking sides in this campaign and they're trying to do polemics against the side that they don't like. I think that's unfortunate, right? It's just not wise. And I've said before, President Assad of Syria says he ignores what they say in the U.S. in the election campaign since they always lie. He waits until they have taken power and then judges them by their actions. And the same story for President Lukashenko of Belarus, right? Strict neutrality, don't get involved. All right. So the party realignment, we say, is on, and the way to pursue it is mass traction, economic demands. Ad hominem stuff, revelations, muckraking, these things are all fine. The more the merrier, right? Absolutely needed. But when it comes to closing the deal, when it comes to actually forging a bond of trust and mutual respect between a candidate and a mass electorate, you've got to go back to Franklin D. Roosevelt and the way that he showed, for example, people, for example, in one of the scenes of Franklin D. Roosevelt campaigning in 1936, his most radical campaign, you could see people lining up to thank Roosevelt for saving their homes, for not putting them out on the street, for preventing them from being completely destitute, or in many cases simply starving to death, right? That kind of charity, and I mean charity as Christian charity, right, as agape, that is the essence of a really great leader. You can see it in Lincoln. You can see it in Martin Luther King. You can see it in Franklin D. Roosevelt. And that's what you actually need to develop. So if that quality is there in a candidate, this is the time to show it. But now, before we get into this, let's talk a bit about Syria, because we always have been, in particular since I visited Syria in November of 2011, concerned about the outcome, right? This, from my point of view, President Assad is the last Nasserist. He is the last representative of that tradition, which at one point was all over the Middle East, right? It was President Nasser of Egypt. The Libyan government of Gaddafi in the 60s went the same way. You can put Arafat into that group. You can put even somebody like Saddam Hussein, others, all different qualities, but progressive, military, modernizing, secular governments. Nasserism, that's how I would look at the Middle East. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. We are, of course, your First Amendment lifeline. We are the first line of defense of the First Amendment. First Amendment for a reason, because all the rest, the whole political process is based on the First Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to associate, petition the government for redress of grievances in a peaceful manner. That's us. That's me. I've said before, I am your canary in the coal mine. And if I disappear from the scene, then you will know that your First Amendment rights are seriously threatened. And therefore, I ask for your sympathetic attention to this, and indeed for your support. And one way you can support this activity is to go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and become a listener. It's a modest fee for a subscription, and with that, you're going to get the best overview that I can generate of world events day by day. And I think we've had some successes in terms of showing that we're up to date on what's actually happening. So americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. And that's one of the best ways you can support what I'm doing. You notice you're offered two ways to subscribe. One is the simple subscription, and another one is the level of activist supporter, which is just a few dollars more. Right? These are not large sums. Right? These are the kind of money you'd be spending in a coffee shop these days. So americansystem.tv, and I appreciate it, and I try to give you the very best product I can day by day, and above all, in a realistic manner, not a utopia, not a fraud, not a pie in the sky, not the rehash of some bankrupt ideology, but praxis, right? The praxis, what to do in order to avoid the worst and to secure the best possible outcome. So now we got to talk about Syria. I'm happy to say that National Public Radio, the Diane Rehm show this morning, right, the International Hour in particular, right, they do this once a week. It's really the leading edge of the Sunday talk shows, if you think about it, right, but done on Friday. They are now of the opinion that ISIS is being slowly crushed. ISIS is being crushed. Now, you look at these presidential debates, and unfortunately, the impression is not that ISIS is being crushed. There's an air of unreality, and we know who has a vested interest in unreality. But when it comes to this ISIS question, this is really important. I call again on the Obama White House to put out more material on this, right? Educate those reporters, make them understand what's going on. ISIS is being slowly crushed. I'm not happy with the slowly. There's no reason why ISIS could not be dispensed with, right? Liquidated before the U.S. election. As a matter of fact, as I've tried to argue on some occasions, there's every reason to make sure that ISIS is finished off before the U.S. election, to clear the air politically, right? If you want to do fact-checking is great. But to actually go out and change reality and do that in a way that will penetrate into the various layers of low information voters, right? You want to make sure that the last of the low information voters, right, the most poorly informed of the low information voters knows that ISIS is being taken care of. So that's what we hope will happen. Now we got some remarks being made by Ashton Carter. We're going to go through these now in a minute. But first of all, let's also point out, even though National Public Radio admits finally that ISIS is being slowly crushed, National Public Radio is still silent, primarily, right? They've never said it that I've heard of, silent on the issue of the faction fight inside the Obama administration, even though that faction fight has been trumpeted. It's been announced to the world, by the likes of me, fine, well in advance, but more recently by the Russian media and indeed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, a serious person. And to get him to say things, as I've been told, it's not easy to get Lavrov to say something unless he's really, really convinced. So there is a faction fight in the Obama administration. It is between the two leaders, I guess we can say, Ashton Carter on the Pentagon on one side and John F. Kerry on the other side. And this is not discussed, right? This was not discussed as one of the principal developments of this week, which I think is that's really a shame. So it should be discussed, right? This should be the first thing. We call on President Obama to exercise his powers as commander-in-chief, come forward with a powerful intervention, and decide this issue. And if Ashton Carter refuses to accept the president's policies, then he should tender his resignation because he's no longer serving the public interest. And I hope that's clear, right? That seems to me to be quite clear. And we're left now with the aftermath of the, unfortunately, by now, I don't want to say complete failure, because there are people in Russia, people in the Russian government, who are still saying that there is hope. But the temporary failure, let's say, the temporary failure and the temporary disruption of the ceasefire that was. And remember, if there's ever going to be peace, it's going to be a resumption of that ceasefire. That's the only way. In other words, with those parties on pretty much those conditions, that is what it's going to be. So we need to talk about that faction fight. And again, not just talk about it. President Obama needs to intervene. Lavrov cited it. Remember, Lavrov said, well, there were these two factions, and some of the U.S. military do not obey their commander-in-chief so much. So when a power of the magnitude and caliber of Russia says these things, you got to do something about it. You can't allow that to stand. Now, Lavrov has met with Secretary Kerry yesterday, and we'll get to that in just a second here on World Crisis Radio. So, Webster, Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, Kerry and Lavrov. Lavrov says to the BBC that the United States is deliberately protecting the Nusra brigades. Nusra is a euphemism for Al-Qaeda. And we've been told, right, we've had years of propaganda that Al-Qaeda is about the worst thing in the world. And in the form in which it exists in Syria, it sure is. So Nusra Al-Qaeda. Lavrov says the U.S. is protecting that. The U.S. is reticent about doing anything to harm them. It won't separate Nusra from these other so-called moderate opposition groups. I mean, this language is absolutely Orwellian and crazy. But the U.S. is trying to spare Nusra, is what Lavrov says. And I think this is substantially correct. It doesn't mean that the speaker is free from sin, but it means that the statement is correct. Lavrov is the opinion that the United States has now lost control of events in Syria, and the United States has lost control of themselves. And all of this to spare and to preserve this Nusra brigade, otherwise known as Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, Damascus, Syria. So that's the Lavrov view. Now, Kerry says, as of as of yesterday evening, the United States is on the verge of ending its diplomacy with Russia over continued bombing of the besieged city of Aleppo, says Kerry on Thursday. The United States and Russia have been trying to negotiate a ceasefire, but Kerry says, quote, the bombing of Aleppo right now is inexcusable, end quote, and 400 civilians have been killed. Kerry says to the Atlantic Magazine conference in Washington, I think we're on the verge of suspending the discussion because it's irrational in the context of the type of bombing that's taking place. And here again, I suppose you could pause this. I wouldn't. I'd keep it going. Jaw is better than war, always. There's always something to negotiate. There's as Cardinal Richelieu says, every time you negotiate, you learn something. So what Russia is evidently preparing to do or attempting to do is to suppress, to quell the terrorist jihadi rebellion in Aleppo. And that is the right policy. That is exactly what should be done. The United States, unfortunately, bears significant responsibility for having shipped in quite a few of those terrorists, right? Those terrorist rebels, jihadi, takfiri, holier than thou, rebels that have been doing so much execution in the Aleppo area and northern Syria in general. Some of them were shipped in from Libya. Some of them were shipped in from other places, from Tunisia, from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf, from all over the world. Right there, I think we're up to easily 90 to 100 countries represented in that group of Syrian rebels. So this is absolutely crazy. And again, the hypocrisy. On NPR today, a woman called in saying, what is it that you people are proposing, right? You're always whining that Obama should do something. What do you want him to do? And the argument then always is, well, we're arguing that he should have done something in 2011 when it all started. Unfortunately, he did. Whether he knew it or not, the administration was doing that stuff. And another one would be 2013. They always trot out this discredited, fake, false story about the gas attack in Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus. But again, what is it that you want? You want to bomb somebody? Do you want to put the divisions in there? How are you going to explain that to the parents of the U.S. troops who are going to get killed if that's what you insist on doing? So there is no policy on the other side. As Kerry had been saying earlier in the week, what's the alternative? You want to do something? What is it? And naturally, it's clear enough to me, I guess, that some of this is crocodile tears. In other words, what these people are concerned about is that they think Nusra could be a useful tool of destabilization. You could turn Nusra loose on all sorts of people, countries, and give them a very hard time. And it seems to me that it's the desire to preserve a strategic pawn of the caliber of Nusra that these people are actually concerned about. And remember, if you're a moderate oppositionist in Syria, you're in the Syrian parliament, and there are about, half a dozen to a dozen representatives who are not the Syrian Ba'ath Party, but they are the opposition. And I've actually met, at the time there, people who are in the opposition, right? They're not pro-Assad. They're not in the Ba'ath Party. But on the other hand, they don't want to join this congeries of 350 terrorist groups that call themselves the moderates. I think the secret also is that Nusra is the indispensable part of the coalition attacking Aleppo. In other words, this Free Syrian Army, this doesn't count for anything, and a bunch of others, right? The one that actually has some firepower, other than ISIS, which is somewhat to the east, out there in the eastern part of Syria, to the extent it exists at all, is that the Nusra Brigade is the one that actually allows them to keep up the siege. So Russia, I think in line with, let's quote General Douglas MacArthur, right? There is no substitute for victory. The very purpose of war, the only way to deal with war is to attempt to end it as soon as possible. Not prolonged indecision, but a quick, humane decision. In other words, something that ends resistance and allows people to go on. That seems to be what Russia is doing. We're told now that the Russian forces, that Russia has approximately 20,000, I'm sorry, not Russia, but the Syrian army with Russian air support, I should say. They have massed significant forces near the side of Aleppo, and they are proposing to to end the siege, to break the siege, and solve the humanitarian emergency that way. Let us also remember, as Thierry Meyssan and the Voltaire Network point out, they are alleging, their finding is the British intelligence agency I-6 was the one that was implicated in the attack on the Aleppo convoy. And again, it's obvious. You can read Voltaire, you can read what I wrote about it, or what I've broadcast about it. There are no bomb craters at the site of this convoy attack, right? None of the artifacts that would have been the inevitable byproduct of a large air attack using bombs, right? Iron bombs, smart bombs, doesn't matter, or any kind of heavy rocketry coming in. It could have been a flamethrower, could have been an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, a grenade launcher, a bazooka, whatever you want. Any of those are possible, but the one thing that seems to be absolutely excluded is bombing by aircraft or even larger missiles coming in from the aircraft. Because those trucks, you look at the pictures, the trucks are intact. They have not been reduced to scrap metal, which would have been the case with these powerful modern bombs. So, you got to Lavrov, right? Lavrov demanded a thorough probe, and he should get it. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Webster, Tarpley in Washington, D.C. here on the afternoon of September 30th. Now, remember, if you want to get this every day, you want to get the lowdown every day, the best that I have to offer, go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and subscribe. Subscribe as an activist or simply as a listener of the program, and would be grateful to you if you do this. Syria. Ashton Carter. Remember, the factions look like this. It's Ashton Carter. It's Ashton Carter as the hang on one second. Yes. Ashton Carter, the Secretary of Defense. Now, his faction is not really the Pentagon. Let's stress this again. The uniformed military don't agree, as far as I can tell, with Ashton Carter. What Ashton Carter has is the neocons in the Pentagon and the neocons outside. The defense intellectuals, right? The kind of people that, the sort of Herman Kahn types, to take it no further than that. Ashton Carter is the spokesperson for that faction, whereas Kerry represents not just the State Department, but the realists in the Pentagon, the uniformed military who don't want to be sucked in to the civil war or international war in Syria, because there are actually two going on. So that's the faction fight. Carter's faction is actually weaker, but he's got all the pro-war, anti-truce people on his side. Ashton Carter has now said that Russia is sowing the seeds of global instability. I'm sorry, the shoe is on the other foot. This is simply wrong. It is the U.S. insistence on preserving these terrorist options, preserving the Nusra option, which has gotten us to this point. If you want to be effective, you've got to work with existing governments, even if you don't like them. In today's world, any government is a potential ally against non-state actors, and in particular against this terrorist congeries of 300 to 350 armed groups in Syria, right? That's the new dark ages. That is neo-feudalism. That is absolutely unacceptable. So at the same time, though, with, I think, pressure from the White House and pressure from public opinion being what it is, Ashton Carter's got to pretend, he's got to make some motions that he's actually going to try to help this situation along. So he gave testimony. This is Ashton Carter to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he says that now we're going to have the attack on Mosul. Thank goodness he's being pushed in that direction, right? This is a sort of halting and grudging kind of concession, but it is going to happen because the Iraqis are going to do it. I guess some Kurds are going to be part of it too. So the word is that Mosul has 20,000 ISIS fighters, and the analysis from Ashton Carter is that ISIS can now be eliminated as a territorial state. But then he wants to tell you that there's going to be a scattering effect of these terrorists, right? They call it the terrorist diaspora. Maybe that's not a great expression, but the terrorists are going to scatter, and they're going to try to take up their trade in Europe, right? What they can't do in the Middle East, they're going to try to do in Europe. Well, I mean, militarily, if that's the case, why not put down some paratroopers around Mosul and seal that place? Why not pocket them in a cauldron, as I guess we can say, and make sure that they don't get out? That would be one way to do it. But they don't, there are a lot of fairly obvious military things that some of these people don't understand. So Ashton Carter says there's a parent tumor, in other words, the center of the cancer, which if you knock it off now, it's going to metastasize, and in particular, it's going to go to Europe. So the answer to that is attack Mosul, attack Raqqa. The U.S. will now have advisors down to the brigade level in the Iraqi army. This is part of the request for 500 more troops. The 500 more troops will bring the total U.S. forces in Iraq up to about 5,000. And if that's what it takes, I think that makes sense. Because remember what the alternative is, right? And that's what that goes for these people who wanted action. If you had bombed Assad 2 or 3 years ago, ISIS would be in command of the entire area, from the coast of Lebanon all the way east to God knows where, right, into Central Asia, quite possibly. So this is to be avoided. Carter promises that he's going to give the Kurds, now this is the Peshmerga Kurds, right? There are 3 kinds. There's PKK, there's YPG. YPG is obviously the most sympathetic and presentable, but there's also this Peshmerga, which is the government of northern Iraq, and they're going to get HIMARS, high mobility artillery rocket systems. And that's a great addition to their firepower. So as the Allied forces, the coalition, advances on Mosul, they will have in their arsenal, in their quiver, the HIMARS, high mobility artillery rocket system. $415 million for the Peshmerga, and so forth. So there are, again, 3 tracks, right? There's the truce track, trying to get the U.S. and Russia to get to the point of setting up this joint integration group. This is what Kerry had taken to Moscow. The Washington Post leaked it. That might have been obviously an attempt to prevent it from happening. But all signs are that Russia sincerely wants to coordinate an anti-terrorist offensive with the United States against these international terrorists. And I say that is exactly what is needed. Stop treating that as a concession. That is a benefit to the United States. So don't get hung up on this business of rewarding dictators or whatever else they say in the way of this kind of nonsense. Now, again, our thesis is that you need mass traction economic demands. Let's see if we can go through this. Right, this is now the domestic side, but we'll be taking this in a number of directions. It was already noticed in July that the Democratic Party tactic of trying to equate every Republican to Trump is not necessarily an effective tactic, or that by itself it's probably not going to be an effective tactic if this is all you do. And I think this is what is being found here. Let's just review some of this stuff. I went through some of this on the American system. Maybe this is a sample of what you can hear on the American system from day to day. Here we have Dana Milbank, right, the witty commentator of the Washington Post. This is Wednesday, September 28th. So the idea is the top of the Republican ticket is largely unpopular, but it is not proving feasible to immediately transfer that unpopularity to various candidates, Republican candidates for Senate and House. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has attempted to tie the local congressional, state or local congressional candidates, Senate candidates to Trump, and that's been done in Texas, Iowa, Minnesota, Florida, Nevada, Pennsylvania. And there's also an attempt to do that with the women's issue, the woman card, as somebody calls it, and the Gold Star families, the Khan family. And it's not working. And let's try to discuss why this inherently needs to be improved on. Back in a minute. Mr. Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., directing your kind attention once again to AmericanSystem.TV, AmericanSystem.TV, and we urge you to go there and sign up for our daily broadcast Monday through Thursday, and that's the daily update. So something worth having, and all the more necessary since we're now only 39 days from the election, and we've got voting going on, right? So you want to know who to vote for. This will allow you to make an informed decision, right? Register, inform yourself, vote. By the way, register. Most states allow you to register sometime in October. So anybody out there who represents the rational, mature level of people in this country, you gotta come forward and register, right? Go and register now. You're going to kick yourself if you get to November and you can't do it. So, yes, register, inform yourself, and vote. Take a look. One of the cable networks had a table that they put up this week. There are a couple of places that let you register into November, but it's too few. You should register in October, and if at all possible, you should do early voting in October, because maybe on Election Day, you want to go out and work at the polls, right? Maybe you want to go out there and help other people to vote. Maybe there are poor people, sick people, old people, people who are indigent, without money, all different things. Help them to get to the polls. So if you want to do that, make sure you voted yourself in advance. But now, mass traction economics, I guess it ought to be clear, right? We're the United Front Against Austerity and the Tax Wall Street Party. The United Front Against Austerity, founded just a few days before the 2012 elections there, right, under the shadow of Superstorm Sandy in downtown Manhattan. The goal is to fight austerity. So that's one of the key reasons why we are in favor of mass traction economic demands. And also because mass traction economic demands work better. They motivate people more because they represent not a demagogic appeal to some obsession, resentment, hatred, or God knows, racialist feeling. But no, it's an appeal to enlightened self-interest and the well-being and stability of the entire society. So mass traction economic demands. These have to be separated from this other question of the process reforms. And the issue with the process reforms is they're all well and good in many cases. Many cases they're highly advantageous. But I don't see how you're going to get enough political power through process reforms to be able to implement the process reforms. In other words, the decisive theater of political conflict is the fight for or against mass traction economic demands, right? So clear, right? Education, housing, medical services, mass transit, economic modernization, the science drivers, right? The plasma physics, the space exploration, right? We did at least a short treatment of the question of getting to Mars and building a colony there. So, and of course the biomedical questions, right? Which have been in the fore now with the Zika virus and the refusal of the Republicans for 10 months to provide $2 billion, and they still haven't provided $2 billion. They've provided about half that, which is really an unbelievable thing. Florida voters, please take note. So, and Florida voters also, please take note that Hillary Clinton in 2008 was in favor of funding and saving the space program, whereas unfortunately Obama was not. So remember that, right? That's an important question. Now, when you get into the world of these political consultants, they don't talk about mass traction economic demands, right? They have every interest not to, because mass traction economic demands, that's economic populism. That's the real thing, the genuine article. Cultural populism is the area of fraud, right? Of duping people, manipulating them, playing on their resentments, making them act against their own best interest. It's the answer. What's the matter with Kansas? What's wrong with Kansas? Too much cultural populism. And of course, that begs the question, why is it that the cultural populists, fraudulent as they are, can prevail? Well, it's because there's no clear economic populist alternative. And that means for everybody. In other words, the Democratic Party with its interest groups and identity politics groups can propose mass traction economic demands, but they tend to be limited to this or that group. The genius of the New Deal and the basis of the entire U.S. success from 1932 to 1968 is this idea that you've got to have nationwide, inclusive, but class-based mass traction economic demands. Now, when Republicans, when Democrats talk about this, there is a movement. For example, we heard it today on National Public Radio. We heard that people in the Democratic Party, for example, in New Hampshire, right, we're told, Kelly Ayotte remains one of the most threatened, most endangered of the Republican Senate candidates who came in on the great Tea Party wave of 2011. And there she is, right? She's endangered. And the Democrats are trying to get some effective stuff going in regard to her. And they're having trouble because they're trying to argue that she's the same thing as Trump. Well, that probably won't work, will it? It won't work. So what are you going to do? So it's Kelly Ayotte against Governor Hassan, and we've got a similar situation in Pennsylvania where we have this Pat Toomey. Now, Pat Toomey is a real austerity fanatic, right? Kelly Ayotte is anti-union. She doesn't like the minimum wage. She certainly doesn't want to raise it. She doesn't like unions and all these things. But here are two examples of Republicans which have, they were there before Trump. It's hard to merge them with Trump. So what do? Well, the guy on National Public Radio today was saying the Democrats are going to bring out the Romney playbook. In other words, the tactics used by the Democrats against Romney may prove more effective. It may be, but not unless you add something more to it. The Romney playbook is not going to be enough. It has been found that if you put in anti-austerity elements, that's going to be better. But you look at Ayotte and especially Toomey, these people are synonymous with austerity. So you've got to make the point that there's an alternative which will allow you to avoid the austerity. So what might that be? Now, there are two levels, right? when you say the Romney playbook, again, I prefer mass traction economic demands, but the Romney playbook also means a certain amount of muckraking, and this has been going on. Let's just review that very quickly. We have had Kurt Eichenwald in Newsweek writing about the worldwide Trump organization business empire and why that business empire is going to generate a terrible series of conflicts of interest, why that is bad. We'll start with this one. We'll be back in a minute. We'll review the muckraking. There's new muckraking this week also from Eichenwald and from Farenthold, and then we'll go on to the real economic stuff that we're recommending here. Directing your kind attention to AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv to join the daily briefing, at least Monday through Thursday, and keep up with all of this that's going on. So look, part of the Romney playbook is things like when Mitt Romney came to town and how he shut down the local factory and sent it overseas. Isn't that amazing? That theme was already there, but that's a kind of muckraking. So there is muckraking, despite the chill wind that's been blowing. Newsweek published this thing by Kurt Eichenwald, 2 weeks ago, about the world conflicts of interest that would be typical of the Trump administration because of this Trump organization being spread all over the world. So Kurt Eichenwald with that. And that has been all over every program on CNN, MSNBC. It's been on the NewsHour. It's been all over the place. The New York Times then published a study of how the Trump empire got $885 million in tax breaks, so almost $1 billion in tax breaks from New York City, New York State, maybe the feds, others, I don't know. Then we had that series. We had a large article in the Washington Post about the guy's name, I think, was Daniel Sullivan, an FBI informant that was used by the Republican candidate to work on his construction sites, right? Perhaps to maintain order, the way they would put it. You get the idea. Then we've had a series of articles from David Farenthold about the Trump Foundation. And part of this was that the money was other people's money. Part of it was that a contribution had been given to Ms. Bondi, who was running for Attorney General of Florida, and she soon thereafter announced that she was declining to join an action to investigate the Trump University. There's also whether money from the Trump Foundation was used to finance private purchases, in particular of a painting, a self-portrait, I guess you'd call it, although painted by somebody else, and so forth, right? So Eichenwald and Farenthold. Farenthold has now, I think, something quite dramatic, which is that the Trump Foundation lacked a key legal credential which New York state law required. And let's get this, it's right on the front page. Trump's foundation may lack New York status. Attorney General says it did not obtain certification required to solicit money. So if in the state of New York, where this is occurring, if you want to go out as a foundation and solicit contributions from individual donors outside your family and not from other foundations, I think, then you need to have a certification. Any charity that solicits more than $25,000 a year from the public must obtain a special kind of registration beforehand. Charities as large as Trump's must also submit to a rigorous annual audit that asks, among other things, whether the charity spent any money for the personal benefit of its own officers. So here we have New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, Democrat, to be sure, if he finds that Trump's foundation raised money in violation of the law, he could order the charity to stop raising money immediately, and with a court's permission, with the court's consent, Schneiderman could also force Trump to return money that his foundation had already raised. That's another element. And we've got today or yesterday coming out Newsweek, which is another installment for Eichenwald, who he keeps you guessing, right? He puts out different contradictory reports in advance of what he's going to be writing about. This time it's that the Trump organization attempted to do business in Cuba during the time of the U.S. Economic embargo, which in many ways is still there. It's thought to be, in the process of being resolved, but that was not the case when Trump did this stuff. This was Trump trying to, or the Trump organization perhaps, in the process of a rapprochement with the Cuban government under Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and others. Now, that is, I think, a very important one because it will have a significant impact in the Miami Cuban community, right? For many, especially the elderly, more elderly of these anti-Castro Cubans in Miami, the issue is that they are fixated very much on Fidel Castro, that government, relations with them. Anybody who appears to be a friend of the Castros is going to have a hard time. So now you've actually got a three-pronged attack, right? You've got what we just said, that some of these Miami Cubans are going to say, what, Trump wanted to cozy up to Fidel and Raul? That's out of the question. You've also got this other issue that the Republicans in Congress showed themselves absolutely indifferent to the Zika virus, even when it was spreading in Miami. And I would add to that this question of aerospace, right? That if you want to revive Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, that entire apparatus, you got to have somebody who wants to have a space program. And that was Hillary in 2008. I think she'd be very smart to try to go out there and say something positive. She could say, we don't want a situation where the United States has to beg Russia or anybody else to be able to put a payload up on the International Space Station. Even I hope, as she would stress, that it's the space cooperation, which is the one part of the U.S.-Russian relationship, which is working just fine and would be working better if the U.S. had not cut all that money out of the program. So that's a model of international cooperation. Don't wreck that, whatever you do. So as usual, the Irenic approach is the best. But now, here's the stuff. We got to go beyond this now. We tried to do it this week on the American system. Wednesday was free college day on the American system, as it turned out. And this was that you've got to address this problem of the $1.3 trillion worth of student debt, and you've got to find a way to make it theoretically and practically possible for every young person in this American jurisdiction to go to college. And we'll explain this in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So muckraking, trying to counter competing stories, right? These are generally more serious stories than some of the ones coming from the other side, right? I think people have had enough of the emails. We had enough already last year when it came to that. But now, what should be the main thrust? And we say mass traction economic demands combined, obviously, with drawing the contrast between oneself and the Republican. The top of the Republican ticket. We have findings now. House Majority PAC. This is what we had a couple of days ago on World Crisis Radio, on the American system. Sorry. We had college was Wednesday. Free College Day was Wednesday. And then yesterday, Thursday of this week, we had this the question of child care. And the child care index and the crisis that we now have that child care for a normal family can cost as much as the in-state tuition for a year at a public university, public college, or something of that sort, right? So that obviously has to be addressed. And the main issue, as always, is who's going to pay? Wall Street should pay. The Federal Reserve should pay, not working families. These zombie bankers, hedge fund hyenas, central bankers, and all the rest who caused the crisis are the ones that have to fork over the money. And in the case of the central bankers, it's not even their money. It's the public credit of the United States that allows them to operate. So we went through this thing about how hard it is to tie every Republican to Trump, that the Democrats have been trying this. House Majority PAC has found, by looking at 25 competitive districts, House districts, they notice that attempting to associate the local Republican with Trump was among the top testing negative attack lines in only 3 or 4. So 3 or 4 districts out of 25, it's proving feasible to say you shouldn't have this congressman because he's a friend of he's pals around with Trump. So that's not working. One expert quoted by Milbank here in the Washington Post, it's a raging debate. Do you say that every Republican equals Trump or that they're just like Trump? Is that believable or not believable? And if it doesn't work, what are you going to do? Because she says it doesn't. This expert says it really doesn't work. It may make a lot more sense to be focusing on things that don't have anything to do with Donald Trump. Now, obviously we have to explain, right? The whole Republican ticket from top to bottom is an austerity ticket, right? They're going to be working with privatization. They're going to be privatizing Social Security. They're going to be privatizing the Veterans Administration. They're going to be privatizing the Postal Service and on and on. They're going to be attacking trade union rights. They're going to be slashing entitlements, right? This is what you hear out of the mouth of Speaker of the House Paul Ryan. This is what the Koch brothers are expecting from Mitch McConnell in the Senate. If that operation should continue to prevail, which we hope it won't, right? We hope that Mitch is no longer the majority leader. Let him be the minority leader for a while. It won't hurt him. So you've got to understand that there really is, with a little bit of digging, you find that there is an austerity element in it. But of course, that's not so obvious, right? So these Democrats are concerned with the fact that maybe people won't even believe that. So the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We've also got the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC. They are trying to make all Republicans wear the scarlet T. And one of their people says Trump is a big part of our strategy, particularly with well-educated suburban voters and communities of color. Fine. This is a nationalized environment, and Trump is on everybody's mind. However, she says, more than half of the DCCC's ads deal with Trump. We've been pretty careful to have targeted messages in each district. Now, maybe that's targeted is too narrow. House Majority PAC has some insights into this, but there's also this other group, Democracy Corps. And the finding from Democracy Corps says that Democrats were less persuaded to paint down ballot candidates with the Trump brush. So these are unconsolidated Democrats. They're going to vote Democratic probably in the local and state races, but not pro-Clinton. And they find that an economic message is more convincing than a Trumpocentric message by 8 percentage points. And among the Democrats who are backing Clinton, but not the Democratic Senate candidate, the economic message was more convincing by 13 percentage points. And I think that is the key to the entire thing. Those may not seem like overwhelming numbers, but right now, 8 points, 13 points, that's what you're going to need. And you've got to essentially put some passion into the mass traction economic demands. I would make them more radical. If the millennials are the problem, as many seem to think that they are, then a more aggressive approach to solving their issues, right? The student loan debt, the cost of college, and job prospects when they get out of there. That's the direction to go in. And if you don't do that, it's political malpractice. So that would mean, for example, we had this the political event on Wednesday was Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders urging his supporters to vote for Mrs. Clinton, but there's obviously still there's a certain reticence, right? There's a certain coldness. The candidate needs to look the voters in the eye, right? Look down the tube of that television camera and say, I am going to make sure that you get favorable refinancing of your student loans at the same level that Elizabeth Warren suggested 3 years ago. We're going to open up the Federal Reserve discount window. It was 0.75%. It's still 1%. This would be a perfectly feasible model since it's already been road tested by Elizabeth Warren, this very popular figure among the Democrats, to say the $1.3 trillion worth of loans are going to be made refinanceable. Right now you can't refinance them, at least most of them, as I understand it. They're going to be refinanced, and they're going to be refinanced at 1% through the Federal Reserve discount window. So whatever we're offering a bank, we're offering to young Americans. And we're going to get more aggressive, right? I think it's better, debt-free college is a good slogan. Free college is the slogan you want to get to. And there are some technical points there that have to be solved. But between them, if you're going to make an appeal to the millennials, well, then make one. And that's got to mean sacrificing Wall Street interest, financier interest, bankers interest, moneylender interest, credit, finance company interest, forget all that, and make it, tailor it to the needs of these millennials, because otherwise their whole progress through life, as we've said, is being interrupted, right? They can't get married, they can't have children, they can't buy a home, they can't become consumers of cars and appliances and all the rest of this stuff. So there's a broad interest of the business community in this stuff. So mass traction economic demands, more sincere, more aggressive, and build some trust that way. Look people in the eye and tell them what you're going to do for them. Back in a minute. Subscribe to my Monday through Thursday program, where we keep you up to date day by day on everything. Some of the stuff I'm saying today, this is a summary of what we've been doing in more detail on the program during the week. So that's the idea. If you want people to trust you, if you want people to get over this sense of estrangement, look them in the eye and say, I am committing to do something decisive to improve your chances in life. And it's got to come from sincerity. In other words, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Lincoln, they had the agape, they had the sense of caritas, the profound concern for humanity and for specific fellow humans. And it does not allow Wall Street and their interests to dictate the tune. Now, in the course of this, let's also remember that the Republican Party may be doomed. Interesting reminder from E.J. Dionne here on Thursday, Washington Post. Trump's enablers may be dooming the Republican Party. Hey, it's possible. So some people, this was a very common theme back in the springtime. Less so lately because of the ups and downs, but still, it seems to me that this is highly relevant. Remember, the 1932 to 1968 political cycle, the New Deal cycle, and that logic of the Electoral College, that's the best one we've ever had. Tremendous success up and down the line. The 68 to 2008 one has been a disaster. And now we're in the 2008 to what? To 2048 or whatever that's going to be, or somewhat less perhaps. That's got to be made a success now. And the real fight right now is not about these personalities, because most of them won't be around. that long. What's important now is to secure a successful party realignment. Oh, here comes old EJ with this. And what he points out is that, the way I would put it, there used to be rock-ribbed Republican New England. And that ended with what? With Goldwater. Goldwater 1964 and all that talk about rocket rattling and war. You go to Massachusetts today. How did it get to be like that? Well, that's the Goldwater campaign of 1964. So Massachusetts is now reliably Democratic in presidential elections. It is an example of how bad things can get for Republicans. The state was at the forefront of a long-term trend, which was the steady movement of moderate suburbanites in the Northeast away from the Republicans. And it was the Barry Goldwater campaign of 1964 that sealed the deal. That meant that they abandoned the Republicans permanently. We ought to have a Massachusetts model. So Trump is not yet in Goldwater territory, and he might not get there, but then again, he might. If we've always promised, reinvention, hasn't happened so far, at least. The Republican Party generally only cares about tax cuts for the rich. So a lot of people don't want that. We could quite as easily and more importantly, we could have argued for California as being a state where the Republican Party is on the way to extinction, right, since the days of Pete Wilson. So Republicans, you have buttered your bread. Now you're going to sleep in it, and that may not be what you want. Now let's look at some of the specifics. The Monday evening debate obviously gave impetus to the Clinton campaign. Clinton has been gaining. The news today is in Michigan. Clinton has a 7-point lead. This is 7 points. She's up over Trump in Michigan. In Nevada, it's +6 for Hillary, 44 Hillary, 38 for Trump. And in Florida, decisive state, as we've just said, we gave three ways you can win Florida. She's up 4%, right? So this is now Mason-Dixon poll, fairly reliable, but always check with that Nate Silver article from 2012, 538. So New Hampshire, and this is thought to be, this may turn out to be the decisive one. Hillary up 7 points, 42 to 35. So New Hampshire, Michigan, Nevada, Florida, all of them, all good news for the Democratic ticket. We're still waiting for Ohio, and this would imply a Democratic prevalence in the Electoral College by 272. That's already winning the election. To 307 could reach it. Now, watch out. There's Brand X is out there. The Los Angeles Times and the University of Southern California Dornsife, they report that that's all. None of that is true. It's really Trump by 5.6%. And this is then picked up by the usual suspects. Newsmax, Drudge, and Breitbart, right? They're trying to prevent demoralization from among those troops. But unfortunately, despite the advice of his advisors, Trump has unleashed another Twitter storm on the great issue of our time, the great question of human destiny, the cynosure of world attention, who is the charming lady Alicia Machado, and more attempts to justify his view of her. And Hillary Clinton writes back that he's unhinged and that he stays up at night to write these derogatory messages about people. So the question with the millennials goes like this. Obama won the millennials 60 to 37 for Romney. Hillary Clinton has currently got 50% of the millennials, but Trump has 40, and this is not, that she needs to roll up a bigger majority or plurality there. Right now, in a number of places, it's I think this is actually a nationwide poll. Hillary 40, Trump 36, Gary Johnson 11, Jill Stein 8. And I would warn people, don't listen to that siren song about don't vote for the greater good, not for the lesser evil. Look, the lesser evil is important, and I think just the simple rationality, right? Are you sane or are you insane? You want to avoid the worst possible outcome, right? We have a choice which is unsatisfactory, right? Both sides are flawed, but they are nevertheless highly distinguishable. It is clear which one of these two represents the more viable outcome. So vote for the greater good, not for the lesser evil. That I don't know if that's even a clever zinger, right? I don't think that's a clever zinger at all because it doesn't ring true. It's crazy. It's not reliable. But you're going to bet your future on vote for the greater good, not for the lesser evil. That is really foolish. And then the unfortunate Governor Johnson has again struck out, right? We like to say that he's the author of the Aleppo budget. His Aleppo budget of 2012 was to cut 42% out of the U.S. federal spending. That would have led, I think, to chaos. We might not even be having an election now if he had gotten in 2012. But now his cuts have somewhat moderated. He only wants to cut the budget by about 20%. Well, that means that the average appropriation for a food stamp meal goes down from about $1.50 per person per meal down to about $1.20, right? Since you're cutting out 20%. So from $1.50 to $1.20. And of course, he's got all kinds of free trade, absolute lack of protection, dirigism, and he has all sorts of other things. And he can't name a single foreign leader, and this, I think, is embarrassing. So I repeat my call to the millennials. This is no good. Notice also Governor Weld may quit, right? When you ask him, are you going to quit? He waffles. He obviously doesn't seem to want Trump to be the winner, and it looks to me like he's waiting for a chance to exit from the ticket. This is all over the place. It is no time for a protest vote. It's time to think about using power for some positive feature. And if you don't take care of power, somebody else will grab it, and that you do not want. So, see you during the week at AmericanSystem.tv.